Everyone's been talking about the mad disrespect that Naoya gave to Choso during the first 2 episodes of Season 3 for Jujutsu Kaisen, but personally, I still think that Yuji and Todo versus Mahito is still one of my favorite fights in the series. And lucky for you guys because, well, for one, you guys hit the like goal in the last part, and 2, we're here again today for the second part of What If Izuku Midoriya had the opportunity to meet Aoi Todo from Jujutsu Kaisen, and even gain his technique, Boogie Woogie. You guys really seem to like the last part, and I've enjoyed writing it, so here we are back with a second part, going into the rest of Season 1, covering the Heroes vs. Villains, the USJ incident, and the entire UA Sports Festival. Now, since we've already made it this far, it would really be a shame not to finish the full story, am I right? Well, I've got a little challenge for you guys. If you all can prove to me that you can hit 400 likes on this video, I promise, pinky swear even, binding vow if you will, for my JJK fans, that I will complete a hour/2-hour part, depending on my writing speed, that will wrap up the entire story as a third part and publish the full story for What If Izuku Met Todo. It might come out next week, depends on how long you guys take, really. But 400 likes and you guys got it. So you know what to do. Share this video, like it, hit all the cool buttons, and let's get into the story for What If Izuku had met Aoi Todo. It had been a really long day, but despite myself, I had even used my power to show a teacher I wasn't someone to mess with. After he had looked down on me, everyone in class seemed impressed with me too, and that nice girl talked to me again. So it had been a great day. Things have been looking up, although Kachan still wasn't speaking with me. Well, I guess that's better than him blowing up my stuff. Still, I should really try to talk to him the next day. During class today, they had us show sketches of our hero costume, and I even talked to my mom about it too. I think something's gonna happen, but I changed my mind quite a bit. See, as a kid growing up, I always thought I wanted to be just like All Might. But after I met him, well, things had started to change for me in a good way. I almost feel like I had to honor him. So, my design changed a little bit. Still, I'm really excited to see how it turns out. I wonder when we actually get our own hero costumes. And finally, the day had arrived. All Might was actually teaching at UA High. When Izuku found this out, he was thrilled. Getting to be so close to his favorite hero, and his master who had been training him ever since that day, with that incident 8-9 months ago. Izuku was thrilled. And he was even more excited when he'd finally seen his new costume. As Class 1A filed out onto the training grounds, with the new assignment being announced by All Might, their Heroes vs. Villains training, Izuku's costume would look quite a bit different now. Instead of the green, iconic bunny ears we know from Season 1, he'd be donning in honor of the man who had saved him and had kickstarted his career as a hero. The Aoi Todo fit, although Izuku didn't know that was his name. Izuku would come out wearing a Yankee-style baggy pants with a white belt, a dark purple shirt, and a black collared jacket. And he'd wear a locket around his neck, a silver locket that looked similar to the one the man had worn, the one who had saved him. Inside was a picture of his mom and him when he was little, and on the other side, a picture of All Might, his idol who had inspired him from the very beginning. While this costume meant a lot to Izuku, it actually looked pretty plain compared to everyone else around. Izuku looked seeing the unique costumes that were designed to be iconic from everyone else. He turned and saw thankfully that himself, Kaminari, and Shoto, that being Todoroki, would be the only ones wearing relatively normal clothing. Everyone else was pretty dazzled up. Although while Izuku's clothes mainly looked like streetwear, he did have one accessory, something he had requested custom from the hero course that himself and his mom couldn't make themselves. It was a special support item that he had requested. Izuku would look down at his right wrist. He'd feel the silver bracelet. It was kinda heavy, but after all that training that he put in, after all that work, it was nothing. All Might would finally come out saying, "Now you look like heroes. Excellent work, everyone. Now let's get into the training room and start our mission." All Might would explain the rules of today's practical exam. The class would be split into 2 teams, heroes and villains. You guys know the gist. Eventually, the teams would be picked, with each of them being told their assignment, the villains having to protect a bomb, which would be causing destruction in the city, and the heroes, who had to capture it or defeat the villains by capturing them. Either or, they would be able to pass, giving them 2 win conditions. Izuku was happy to see that he had been randomly drawn onto the same team as that nice girl, Uraraka, although he'd frown when he saw who he had to participate against. Meanwhile, Kacchan, or Bakugo, would turn. He'd have a menacing grin as he glared up at Izuku. When had he gone so tall? Izuku would turn back, his eyes matching the stare of Kacchan. As the matches would begin, it would be Izuku and Uraraka's turn versus Bakugo and Ida. Well then, Bakugo, as you know, that Midoriya has a rather powerful quirk, the ability of his to switch places. Teleportation's a nasty quirk to fight against. We'll have to be on our wits and work together to overpower him. Not to mention Uraraka with that gravity quirk. She could be quite a menace as well with their teamwork. Bakugo would laugh, saying he's gonna go take out Deku by himself. Screw off, Metalhead. Metalhead? What? Where does this come from? I'm your teammate, you know. Such disrespect. But the bickering had already begun. Meanwhile, Izuku would be working with Uraraka as they enter the building. Alright, I think that the 2 of us should work together. My quirk, well, Boogie Woogie, is strong especially when I have a teammate. He'd squeeze his fist. While I do have above average physical power, Uraraka would give him the slightest side eye. Slight. I still would prefer to work with someone else. The worst case scenario is me versus Kacchan in a 1v1. He's always been super strong, and with his speed and reflexes, I'm sure he might be able to adapt to my technique quickly. Even if I swap us rapidly, there's a chance he can still overpower me. He'd tighten his fist. If we work together, that won't happen though. So ideally we stick together. Due to Boogie Woogie, Izuku's method here would change drastically. He would think that they actually have a shot of beating Bakugo if a 2v1 were to happen. Welcome to my jumping academia. As Bakugo would have left Ida to protect the bomb, he'd head down to face Uraraka and Izuku. Izuku would tell Uraraka that he would protect her no matter what, holding his hand out in the same way that Todo had for him, protecting him from the sludge villain. In this way, Uraraka's eyes would light up as she'd see Izuku in a different light. This guy's kinda cool, huh? As the 2 would face down Bakugo, Uraraka would prepare the capture tape. Uraraka, are you ready? Yeah! Deku, I knew you'd be down here. Come and fight me like a man. Or were you gonna make your little girlfriend fight me for you, huh? Girlfriend? Uraraka would stutter. What? No, we're just friends, Izuku would say, quickly panicking. This is what Bakugo had been waiting for. He would take this opportunity to leap forward, blasting explosions behind him as he powered his speed. But Izuku would quickly gather his bearings. As Bakugo leaped toward him, Izuku would quickly clasp his hands together. Activating Boogie Woogie, his own place with Bakugo would swap. This would be the second time that Izuku had used his technique on Kacchan, and he would remember this disorientating feeling. As he'd keep blasting forward from his momentum, he'd almost slam into the wall behind them. He'd quickly move his hands in front, propelling himself with his explosions to stop the impact. As he slightly tapped into the wall, he'd turn irritated. Deku, that's one hell of annoying power. It's perfect for a brat like you. Kacchan would turn to attack Uraraka. He'll take her out first, and then focus on me, making it a 1v1. That I won't allow. He'd use Boogie Woogie, swapping places with Uraraka as Bakugo was about to attack her. Immediately, Izuku would catch the blow of his hand, covering his fist with the blue energy that he'd noticed after he had used Black Flash. He could clearly see it now covering his body. It was easy to manipulate. With a little bit of mental force, he was able to strengthen his fist. Although he had to be careful. If he focused too much, it was possible for him to activate One For All with this power, since they felt very similar in their activation. Izuku would catch Bakugo's blow, hardly even flinching. This would cause Bakugo to be surprised considering the amount of velocity he had, but only for a second. Izuku would lean forward, throwing a jab towards Bakugo's face, but Bakugo would dodge back, leaning backwards as he'd grab Izuku's arm and try and throw him. As he threw him with his other free hand, Deku would grab his other hand, clasping them and activating Boogie Woogie as his place with Bakugo would swap. Bakugo would be the one getting thrown. With a double-handed hammer fist, Izuku would rock Kacchan in the gut. He'd cough out spit as he goes flying into the ground, feeling his back crack against the ground. Uraraka would yell, "Ooh, nice one!" with Bakugo only getting more irritated. "Fine, you think you're so funny, huh? I'll just blow you to hell." "Kacchan, I recommend not doing that. This is not going to work out well for you." Bakugo would smirk. "I can hit you from this range just fine if that's what you're worried about. Watch this." He pulled the pin on his grenade hand, releasing the gauntlet sweat he had fully been charging up. This is when Izuku would hold up his own right hand, his silver bracelet, as he pointed towards Bakugo. Bakugo would rip the pin out, and at that same moment, Izuku would tighten his fist and twist, the inner circle of the ring twisting with him as the support item would launch out, a silver marble. The marble was roughly an inch in diameter, and it was made of steel. It was relatively heavy. As it went flying past Bakugo's ear, he'd laugh, saying, "You missed," as the roaring explosion would fly towards Izuku and Uraraka. Deku would bring his hands together, saying, "Oh, I hit my target." He'd clap his hands twice, swapping the marble with Uraraka and then himself with Bakugo. In a mere instant, their places had been swapped. Izuku would turn, watching the explosion roaring behind him, as in that split second, Bakugo would be fully impacted by his own explosion, shattering the building and the wall behind him. Beyond the pain, Bakugo could only wonder, how? How had he been able to activate his quirks so quickly? The secret to that was actually within One For All. Immediately as Bakugo launched that explosive attack, it was far too fast for him to react to normally. Using One For All and his blue energy, he was able to increase his physical power enough to where he could clap his hands in rapid succession, almost instantaneously swapping positions. Using this new support item of his, he was able to swap multiple people even without rubble. It was something he had noticed from during the hero exam, that if he had more items he could swap with that were of a small enough size, then he could have saved himself and Uraraka without getting hurt, or without having to fight that big robot. Though the zero-pointer had helped him out in the end. Bakugo would lie there, the back of his costume completely scorched, and he'd have third-degree burns laying in the dirt. He could barely move. The only reason he hadn't died was because of his natural resistance to his own quirk, but that would have been lights out. He had no idea that Izuku could move that quickly, or react to an attack of that speed. It was something he had underestimated. Izuku would casually walk forward as he pulls out the capture tape, wrapping it under Bakugo's chin and tightening it around his head, like a bow. "Well, I guess I'll call that a wrap then." Bakugo would grit his teeth as he'd feel tears welling into his eyes. How had he been surpassed this quickly? He hadn't even gone to touch him. It was so frustrating. Unbelievably frustrating. Izuku would turn, walking away, as he'd tell Uraraka that they have a bigger fish to fry. Bakugo would turn, with all of his hatred, he'd yell out saying that this wasn't over, Deku. Deku would turn again, facing Kacchan. "This is an exam, and you just lost fair and square. So lay there and wait to be healed. There's nothing more to say." And with that, he'd walk off, leaving Bakugo to his own despair. The two of them would head upstairs where Ida was waiting for them. Uraraka would turn to Izuku as they'd nod to each other, looking to Ida. This one wasn't even worth fighting. He'd swap Uraraka with the bomb, and just like that, Izuku would touch it. Ida would howl in pain. I didn't even get a chance to fight. It was instantaneous. What was the point? I just stood here for 20 minutes until the end of the exam. Ida would simply stand there, watching as Uraraka was now where the bomb had been. The team would have won, with Uraraka giving Izuku a fist bump, admiring how cool and calculated he had been. It was like he was a completely different person than when they had just been talking casually in the classroom. In combat, he was impressive. Izuku was grinning from ear to ear, and flexing his fist. "I didn't even hurt myself. I channeled a bit of One For All there too, although it wasn't nearly as much as I thought I had used." He'd look at his arms and hands. They looked a little bruised, but nowhere near the amount of damage he would have done to himself normally. Using the cursed energy that he had obtained from Boogie Woogie and Black Flash, Izuku had strengthened his body to a degree to where One For All wasn't able to completely shatter his bones and flesh. This was a huge step. He had no idea how or why Boogie Woogie had this physical enhancement, but he was going to use it. Having this power was pretty advantageous. He would go to Recovery Girl anyway just to heal him quicker, but considering what he had been through, this was way better. While he was still not fully comfortable using One For All, and he wouldn't dare to try and do something like All Might could yet, he really felt there would come a day where he'd become strong enough to consider himself equivalent to his favorite hero, to All Might. As everyone else took their exams, it was clear that the most overwhelming victories were Izuku and Todoroki, the two having won for the complete opposite reason. Todoroki having completely frozen the building and everything inside, and Izuku's tactical fighting style with Uraraka having overpowered a greater physical threat. As if to match Todoroki's half and half style, the two were polar opposites. But nonetheless, they were definitely impressive. Bakugo had completely blown his top, even snapping at Recovery Girl after he had been healed. He somehow seemed even more unhinged than he had been in the original timeline. It was quite the sight. He eventually had to be put in a straitjacket by Aizawa to sit through the rest of the day's classes. At the end of the day, when he could finally leave, Bakugo would grab all his stuff and storm off of campus. This time, Izuku wouldn't chase him. He had given Bakugo the fight he wanted, and he had won. Over the next couple of weeks, things would stay tense, all the way up until the USJ, the trip that the class had been excited about. Even Bakugo seemed a little excited. Everyone would happily get onto the bus, with Eraserhead telling the class to behave on their trip. "I don't want to see anyone roughhousing. I don't want to see anyone disrespect the lecturer when we're there." He'd eye Deku. Izuku would blush slightly as he looked away. He was now kind of embarrassed about that first day when he had done the exam. Anyway, the class would arrive, and just as usual, 13 would welcome the hero course, Class 1A, to the USJ, the unforeseen simulation joint. As 13 was explaining the purpose of the facility, how they'd be practicing rescue operations in different scenes, settings, and locations, a strange purple aura would begin to fill the center by the fountain at the center of the area. Izuku would notice along with the class, and Eraserhead would be the first to act, telling everyone to hold and not panic. 13 would turn, seeing the purple aura appear into a portal, ripping through space, as villains would begin to pour out of the portal in space. These would be ranging from people who had been convicted in prison to your common day street thugs, but all of them had quirks, and all of them looked murderous. Izuku would feel their murderous intent upon him as he'd squeeze his fists. He'd whisper, looking down to Uraraka and Tsuyu, telling them to be ready for a fight. As the villains would begin getting more rowdy, 13 would hold off protecting the students while Aizawa went down to investigate what was going on. And finally, at the end of it all, a man wearing a mask face with 5 fingers around it. His hair would be gray and messy. His clothes were all black, and standing next to him was a purple entity with golden eyes. He'd turn and speak to it. "Kurogiri, spread them just as I instructed." And just like that, the plan would begin to take place. The League of Villains would attack, but they'd also be confused. Their intel had told them that the hero All Might would be present today. What they hadn't anticipated was that he'd be absent. Izuku's eyes would be focused on the bird-like creature, its membrane, its gray matter sticking out through its skull. What a horrifying creature. Is that even a person? What kind of quirk could make someone look like that? Izuku would wonder in his head, looking at the Nomu, although he didn't know that was its name yet. Kurogiri would attack, teleporting toward the students. 13 would once again try and use her quirk to protect them, using vacuum, using space. But once again, using a portal, Kurogiri would try to teleport the energy back behind 13. Izuku instead would teleport 13 away from her own attack. Realizing what was going to happen, he would save her, using Boogie Woogie to swap Kurogiri with her. Kurogiri would be surprised for a moment, thinking, "What?" 13 would be surprised too, feeling disorientated from the sudden shift in distance. She realized she was still activating her quirk and would quickly deactivate it, seeing that she was almost ripped apart by her own power. The students were given another chance now that Kurogiri had been deflected by Izuku's Boogie Woogie. Bakugo, Todoroki, and Ida would strike, launching an attack at their main body. Kurogiri was still under the effects of 13's power, which would leave him open and vulnerable. Bakugo would cause an explosion on his steel carapace, causing him to get taken down instantly, as Todoroki would freeze his body. Kurogiri would be stuck, unable to move. Ida would land a final kick, which would hit him directly in where his head should have been, but it would have gone through smoke. They had successfully captured him for now, hoping that he couldn't use his quirk at this moment. It sure seemed like he couldn't. Todoroki would completely freeze him in ice, leaving him encased and unable to act. Eraserhead would still be active, fighting a majority of the villains. However, more were soon arriving. Since Kurogiri hadn't been able to separate the students, they'd begun to swim toward the center, move towards the center of the arena, and all close in on Eraserhead. He was clearly exhausted. Izuku would turn, looking at the others and 13. 13 was still in a good condition for battle, but if she left to join Aizawa, the rest of them would be in danger. He turned to Ida. "Hey, Ida, I need you to go and find Professor All Might. We need to get him here as soon as possible. I can sense, well, something's telling me that bird creature in the middle is way too strong for us right now. I'm not sure even I could beat it." Bakugo would raise an eyebrow. "Like you're some big goalpost or something." Uraraka would give him a narrowed look, which Bakugo would not give a shit about. Anyway, Ida would follow Deku's idea, using his speed quirk to run from the incident and go and get All Might as soon as possible. They needed his help to take down this many villains regardless. Meanwhile, Izuku would turn back to the rest. As for everyone else, Bakugo, with his increased animosity, wouldn't even bother listening to him. "Do what you want. I'm gonna go de-stress on some villain scum." He'd fly off using his explosions, chasing down villains to join Eraserhead. Izuku would sigh. "He has no idea how to do teamwork, does he? Who would ever want to work with that guy?" Anyway, he turned back to everyone else. "We need to work together to assist Aizawa. Eraserhead's quirk is good in close quarters combat, but I'm actually amazed he can last this long. Everything I know about him would tell me that this sort of fight isn't advantageous for him. He's the kind to sneak up on enemies, but he's somehow keeping his own even out there, just by deactivating their quirks." Izuku put a hand on his chin. "I have an idea." He turned to Todoroki and Kaminari. "I have a plan, but it's going to require both of you to help." They nod, with Todoroki even listening to Izuku here, respecting him more than he had in canon at this point. 13 would order them to not fight, saying it's too dangerous, but Izuku would turn, telling her that isn't an option. There's easily over 100 villains down there, and if they stand around, then Eraserhead is going to die. He would say it so matter-of-factly that she'd feel shook. "Then I will—" "No, 13, you know that isn't an option." Once again, Izuku would have a plan. If they took everyone out, it's possible the villains would follow them. They also needed someone to keep an eye on this guy. He'd kick at the little glacier of Kurogiri. If he somehow escapes or gets out of here, then there's no way that he doesn't follow up with his plan, maybe even taking them out or teleporting them far away. They need to stay within quarters and keep an eye on him, as well as assist from the background. Izuku, with his tactical mind and his strategy, would place Yaoyorozu, Mineta, Mina, and the other more defensive fighters, including Aoyama and those with limitations to their quirks such as Sato, into this back line. Their job was to protect each other and 13, who was mildly injured, while Yaoyorozu could make far-distance weapons such as bows, cannons, or other projectiles and use them to attack villains from afar. If any come into close combat, Sato will defect them, helping with Mina. Meanwhile, Kirishima, Todoroki, Kaminari, himself, Sero, and Uraraka would head into close quarters combat. Uraraka would be surprised that she was on this list. But I'm not really... He turned to her. I'm gonna need your help with something specific. You see that bird guy in the middle? If they give orders to him, or he starts fighting, I think not all of us are gonna make it out of here. But I have a plan. He'd tell Uraraka his plan and she'd be surprised, saying, That's nuts! Are you sure we could even do that? Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. With the plan ready to action, the united front would begin. Tomura would be scratching his neck watching as Eraserhead was taking out villains, but he was getting tired. He'd sneak up behind Eraserhead ready to grab him, and Eraserhead didn't even see it coming. This was the end for that hero. But his touch never came. Instead, the physical touch he would land on one of the cronies he had hired. What? As he had been about to touch Eraserhead had swapped with this other person, another one of the villains he was fighting. The man would scream out in pain as decay would wither him from the outside inward, eventually ending him. What just happened there? Aizawa would grit his teeth, saying that they shouldn't be here, to go back and that he'll handle this. Izuku would take his hands and brush them back through his hair, his face becoming chiseled. He'd say, while most students would listen to that line, we are the exception. With his small force alongside Bakugo, they begin attacking the villains. With Izuku using his Boogie Woogie technique, he'd be manipulating all of their positioning, changing those who are more advantageous to each fighter. Todoroki would use a wide range of attacks, freezing villains instantaneously. Sero would be wrapping them up and immobilizing them, hanging him from glaciers, and Kirishima would be taking out the power types. Bakugo would smirk at him, saying, "You listen to that idiot, huh? Well, I don't mind having your backup," as the two would work together to take out more villains. Meanwhile, Tomura would turn to Nomu, saying, "No matter what, we can't lose here. I suppose I'll have to use your power early," ordering Nomu to take out Eraserhead. He was fast, so fast Izuku could barely perceive him, even with the power that he had enhanced himself with from the energy of Boogie Woogie, with his cursed energy. He'd have to use it. There's no way he wouldn't, right? He'd have to use one for all. Uraraka and him would begin their plan. As Nomu threw a massive punch at Aizawa, Izuku would swap Aizawa with Shigaraki. Nomu's punch would rip into Shigaraki's side as the man would cough out in pain, his ribs shattering as he goes flying into the wall, knocked unconscious and bleeding. He couldn't even realize what had happened. At this moment, Izuku laughed. He was right. This thing was some kind of monster. It turned, not even noticing that it had attacked its own, then preparing another attack on Aizawa. Aizawa was neutralizing its quirk, but that didn't even matter. It was so physically strong that it was still able to almost have killed Shigaraki in a single blow. With this, it would go to attack him again. Aizawa now feeling the speed and pressure of this creature following its master's final orders before he had been knocked unconscious. Izuku would fully utilize this. With Boogie Woogie, he would weaponize the Nomu, swapping Eraserhead with other villains, causing Eraserhead to cover his mouth, saying, "If you don't stop, I'm gonna puke." Nomu would be taking out villains one after the other, screeching in frustration as it couldn't reach Aizawa. That's it. Izuku would keep using Boogie Woogie as Uraraka would begin to inch closer and closer. With Izuku's support capabilities, this was becoming lighter and lighter work, the villains taking massive injuries from the Nomu's powerful punches. Eventually, he began to run out of villains. Just as All Might was about to arrive, he was 5 minutes away from the USJ. Tomura began to awaken, seeing Izuku clapping his hands as Nomu was taking out villains one after the other. Aizawa looked like he was about to be sick, having to deactivate his quirk. This was not good. Some of the villains had even started to be, well, let's just say, taken out for good from Nomu's punches. But what else was Izuku supposed to do? Uraraka would finally be close enough as he'd tell him it's time. Uraraka would hold her hands out in front of one of the villain's bodies who had been unconscious, as Izuku would quickly swap Nomu with this person. Uraraka would graze its skin with her hands, and immediately he'd swap her before he could swat her away. With this, he'd swap another villain in its place, with Nomu batting the villain's body into the wall, cracking the concrete as blood now leaked into the fountain. The Nomu would begin to feel weightless. As it would scrawl in confusion, Uraraka would have activated her quirk, the creature now losing its weight. As it jumped off the ground, it would have miscalculated, firing into a concrete wall. Its legs would be sticking out as it pushed itself back in, screaming in frustration as it finally turned, leaping back off the wall as it propelled through the air, like a bird. This is what Izuku had been waiting for, though. Izuku would take out a support item, launching the black marble into the air as he clasped his hands, using Boogie Woogie directly in front of him as his fists would be pulled back. He only had one shot at this, maybe two, but this was his best idea. If this didn't work, he had no idea what would. He charged the blue energy into his right arm as much as possible, focusing all of his power there, and then he dig deeper. Sparks of energy would charge across his arm as red veins beneath his skin would fill with power, the power screaming of one for all. He charged his strength into it as he'd run forward towards the marble before Nomu could get there. With him activating Boogie Woogie on his fist, he'd throw a full-powered punch coated in cursed energy and one for all. Come on, this has to do it! Black Flash! Uraraka would immediately deactivate her quirk, Nomu's weight returning as it fell towards Izuku, not knowing what had happened. Izuku would land a full power punch into its abdomen, charged with Black Flash and cursed energy roaring through his arm. His skin would turn purple as he'd scream out in pain. His right arm's bones had been completely shattered by the blow, energy roaring through the Nomu, even with its shock absorption quirk. It would go flying up into the ceiling and rip through, as a star would go flying across the sky. Izuku had timed it perfectly. Here's what the plan was. He wanted Uraraka to help increase the momentum of the creature as much as possible, using her quirk to make sure it was out of the way of other students, while Izuku could prepare as much power in his arm as possible. With this, he'd be out of the fight almost, but he would have taken out the biggest threat. Izuku would have used Black Smash! This most powerful attack of his, having successfully attacked and pushed the Nomu out of the USJ, sending it flying up into the atmosphere, and landing in a forest far away, where it would stop moving, landing into the ground, just like what All Might had done in the original timeline. All Might would rip the doors open, seeing what had happened. Kurogiri had been captured, Shigaraki was unconscious, and the League of Villains was slowly getting dismantled. Izuku would fall to his knees, breathing heavily as he leaned on his one good arm, his right arm bleeding and turning purple all over. Ugh, that was way too much power for now. Thanks, Uraraka. He'd begin to pass out, feeling the blood flowing from his arm as the adrenaline was slowly wearing off. Tomura was now fully awake, yelling for Kurogiri to do something. All Might was here. They had to go. They needed to go now. But it was too late. Kurogiri had been outmatched, captured, and so had the rest of the League of Villains. With nowhere to run, Shigaraki would be captured at the USJ, alongside Kurogiri, and the League of Villains would be imprisoned as quickly as they had arrived. Izuku, with the power of Boogie Woogie and his tactical mind, would have been able to counteract even the most powerful opponents, with his final attack finally taking out the Nomu, which had been the biggest threat to all of them. Even Aizawa, who was getting over his queasiness, was a little impressed. And that brought an end to the incident, with All Might telling Izuku how proud he was of him, that he would look just like him and he saw that punch. He had truly gone plus ultra. The rest of the class was impressed too, with Todoroki admiring Izuku, saying that he definitely had the makings of a great hero. Todoroki was slowly warming up to him. This man was both smart, competent, and powerful. But there was one thing standing out. Why was his own quirk so multifaceted? It was like he had two abilities, especially that last attack. Was that lightning? He saw black energy rip out of Izuku's hand. And how could that be related to teleporting? There was so much he didn't understand, but something did stick out to him. His form, it was like the glistening image of All Might. Had All Might had a secret child with someone with a teleportation quirk? And just like himself, Izuku had inherited both of them? Was he a half and half quirk type just like him? These thoughts began to be implanted in Todoroki's mind. Bakugo would have been agape. Seeing Izuku take out that powerful villain, he would be frustrated to say the least. With everyone heading back to UA, Izuku would get treated by Recovery Girl, being told not to be so reckless. Although this was the second time, he still needed to be more careful about using such a powerful attack. Izuku would nod, mentally thinking to himself, I even used curse energy to try and protect my arm, but when I had hit that black flash, along with that full power smash, I just lost it. One for All overpowered that energy like it was nothing, and that's why my arm couldn't handle it. A few days later, the UA Sports Festival would be announced, and everyone was excited, especially Class 1A. After having that taste of action, they were all looking for a good fight. Izuku's arm was healed up, Bakugo had even gotten a little steam off, and hearing about how the sports festival would be a student versus student, he would glare at Izuku. I'm gonna tell everyone how strong I am by beating you in the sports festival, he'd say, finally having a goal he could work toward to finally get one over on Deku. The other classes, though, were thinking the same thing. Class 1A had already gained a reputation as being the ones with the most real-world experience, having already taken out over 100 villains working with a pro hero. Aizawa understood that they were trying to protect him and defend themselves, but he was still frustrated. He had given Izuku a good talking to, yapping his ear off about how irresponsible it was to bring students into that fight, telling him that risking their lives was not okay, and that if he had been taken down there, then it would have been fine for them to act. Izuku, though, would bark back, saying that if they stood there and watched as someone died, how could they call themselves heroes? The subtle bickering between Eraserhead and Izuku would even cause All Might to intervene, saying that all's well that ends well, and that no one got severely injured, and everyone was okay, saying that although they had a few casualties on the villain side, things had worked out. This is when Aizawa would point out that Izuku's lack of attention had actually caused those deaths, basically putting guilt on him for protecting them by using the villains as these meat shields. Shinso and the rest of Class 1C and 1B would come up, telling Class 1A either how much they admired them, or, well, that they were too cocky for their own good. Shinso especially now pointing to Bakugo and Izuku, saying they were way too cocky for just being students, and that they weren't better than the rest of them. Both Izuku and Bakugo would be pissed off here, telling them that if it was their lives, would they be so proud of it, saying that they defended themselves, and it's not like they were looking for glory. The two saying this at the same time would turn looking at each other, causing Bakugo to get red in the face, turn and yell at Izuku saying, "Don't copy me!" Eventually, the time for the tournament would arrive. It was finally time for the UA Sports Festival. And when they announced it, everyone would be excited. Wearing their gym clothes as their uniform, the entire stadium would be packed. As the first event would be rolled for, Midnight would announce it. The obstacle course race, saying that the winner would receive points and be declared as number one for the first challenge. Izuku would smirk. This type of competition was perfect for him, and others knew it too, specifically Ida, Bakugo, and Todoroki. There was a subtle strategy at play now. Some of you guys may already see what's going on here. Unlike in the original race, where all of them were trying to stay as far ahead as possible and block their enemies, now, the front runner-ups of Bakugo and Todoroki would be trying to stay as close to the pack while still maintaining first place. They had to move slower because if either of them or if anyone took a high advantage in the front, Izuku could easily swap his place with theirs using his quirk and get an instant victory as long as he was within range. So there was only two options. One, getting as far as possible instantaneously and quickly and hoping that he couldn't teleport and swap them using his Boogie Woogie, or B, staying close to the pack and forcing Izuku to have to fight through like everyone else to a point where they could still get a victory as long as they were close enough at the end by the finish line. This was going to be a lot tougher than the original. Todoroki would try his best with the first strategy, creating a huge wall of ice behind him and running forward. But the ice was still clear enough that Izuku could make line of sight with him, and he wasn't fast enough to evade him. Izuku would clap his hands, swapping with Todoroki to the man's frustration. Bakugo would yell out, "You idiot! Why'd you just give him a lead like that, huh?" Izuku would not waste this chance, running as fast as possible to get through the minefield and toward the large robots. He wouldn't even bother fighting them, swapping himself with the robots to get through them as he continued moving along the obstacle course. Tenya Ida would now use his quirk to move as fast as possible, having to get close to Izuku. He couldn't get in front of him, but if he could get close enough to before the finish line, he could use a burst of speed to beat Izuku before he could clasp his hands, to use Boogie Woogie. In fact, he even had an idea on how to counter it. The mines would go off as the frontrunners would now be on Izuku's heels. Izuku would charge his legs with cursed energy, now running as fast as humanly possible and even a little faster, somewhat superhuman, and he was barely staying ahead of them. Tenya would then come running up behind as he had just about outpaced Izuku. The finish line was in sight. Izuku would smirk as he was about to clasp his hands together. He'd have an idea. He'd use Boogie Woogie. But as he clapped his hands, Ida would turn around before he could clap, recipro bursting the opposite direction. As Izuku clapped, nothing happened. It was a feint, Izuku would say, as he then keeps running and makes it through the arena, getting first place by the skin of his teeth. Ida would be shocked. He didn't activate his quirk? But he'd turn, now being outpaced by both Bakugo and Todoroki, coming in fourth place. Izuku would have snatched the victory, and the entire arena would cheer. Seeing his incredible quirk in action, he was quickly becoming the dark horse for this tournament. And he'd even have some fans from those who had seen his sludge villain fight. There would be pro heroes cheering for him, saying, "Hey, I remember you from over a year ago. Nice to see you got onto UA." Izuku would feel warm in his chest. He felt so proud and happy. However, the victory would soon become sour, as Aizawa would grin, announcing the 1 million point headband on Izuku Midoriya. The rest of the arena would cheer, seeing the 4-man Calvary competition, and Izuku had the biggest target on his head. The battle would be rough. Everyone was gunning for him, and worst of all, he wasn't sure if he could use Boogie Woogie on this many objects at once. He had never tried it with this many people before, but it wouldn't hurt. As the fight began, he'd be rushed by 2 teams. He'd target all of them. 4, 5, 8, 6, 7, what? 13. At this moment, he'd clasp his hands, switching 3 teams around and causing pure chaos. Izuku would laugh. He wasn't sure he could do it, but it had worked. He had been able to swap multiple people, but it had taken a toll on him. He noticed that the blue aura, the energy around him, had depleted. He would need time to recover. He'd tell his teammates that he would need some time before he can do a big move like that again, with the others supporting him. He'd have the same team as the original, those who had supported him. Izuku would think about taking the other team's headbands, but decided against it. He'd tell the others his reasoning. "I'm already limiting how much I can use my power for. If I go for headbands, it'll take too much out of me. And we already have the highest level headband, so there's no reason we need to attack. We should just focus on defense." When Bakugo had gone for his last-ditch effort to grab the headband, Izuku would have shot one of his marbles up into the air, switching with it since Bakugo hadn't been expelled for leaving his 4-horseman team on his own. Izuku thought he could do the same. Leaving contact with the group, he'd teleport up into the air, to Bakugo's dismay. Todoroki would try his best holding his hand up as he almost felt flames licking his hand. He could have struck him from here if he had used it, but he withheld himself. As Izuku landed back toward the team, Dark Shadow would eventually catch him. Mei Hatsume would laugh, saying that the support item he was using was working perfectly, explaining that she had been the one to make that baby. "But baby?" Uraraka would say. Izuku would laugh, thanking his team members for their superior victory. All of them had worked marvelously together. With the team having taken first place, both Todoroki and Bakugo would be furious, all that was left was the versus battles, the final chance to prove their superiority. With this, Izuku's team would be far in the lead. It was here that he'd finally deem it time, and by he I mean Todoroki, to have a chat with Izuku. He would go to speak with him in the hall, asking him straight up honestly if he was actually All Might's secret love child or something. Izuku would blush. Me? All Might's what? No, that's fine. Keep your secrets if you want. I just figured I'd ask since my father's number 2. I'll see you in the battles. Todoroki would feel a twinge of sadness, but he didn't know why. He still hated his father. What would it have meant anyway, even if Izuku had admitted to being All Might's son anyway? What did it matter, other than proving that the genetic superiority of heroes was absolute? The fights would begin, and most of them would stay the same. However, the 2 early ones that I'm going to talk about would be significantly different. One would be Bakugo versus Uraraka. He would be far more aggressive, way more than he had in the original, which would cause outrage in the stands. Uraraka would have tried her best to imitate Izuku's strategy, using rocks and explosions from Bakugo to try and attack him with his own power, but just like in the original, she would get put down easily. Bakugo's explosions were simply too much for her, and she didn't have the quick ability or the thinking power as Izuku to use her quirk in a way to get close enough to touch him, much less defeat him. Uraraka would get grabbed by the hair and forced onto the ground. Izuku would tighten his fists as his eyes would narrow. He didn't think that Bakugo was such a jackass. As Uraraka would cry out in pain, this fight, with all of her work, her effort, she'd feel tears streaming down her face, knowing that she had lost. As President Mike announced the victory, the stands would yell in outrage, telling him he's no hero. What a jerk! Bakugo would yell out for them all to shut up, saying he'd taken the victory fair and square. Uraraka would still be lying on the arena, but Izuku wouldn't have it. He'd clasp his hands together, getting her out of there instantly. As she appeared next to him in the seats in the stands, his hands would be together. Oh, Uraraka, She'd be in tears, but she wasn't just sad or upset. She was angry. I tried everything, but I just couldn't win. She was frustrated. Izuku would smile. He was worried that she would have lost confidence or been afraid that she couldn't be a hero from this fight, but it seemed that this had lit a spark in her more than the one in the original had even. She was mad, upset that this guy who she had easily taken out with Izuku's help had been so much more powerful than her. It really put everything into perspective. Izuku would put his hand on hers, telling her that she did an incredible job, and that if he gets to fight Kacchan in the finals, he'll embarrass him just for her. He'd give her a smirk, a confident one even. Uraraka would blush, thinking, oh, wow, I didn't know it'd be this nice to be comforted by him. But it wouldn't last for long. The other fights would take place quickly, and in no time at all, it was Izuku's turn versus Shinso. Just like in the original, he would have heard a warning from Ojiro telling him not to speak to Shinso no matter what. Izuku would raise his eyebrow asking what he meant, with him explaining what had happened to Shinso and him when he had been talking to him once and how he had lost memories of that conversation. Izuku would take it into consideration, smiling and saying that he'll do his best. As the fight would begin, Shinso would begin mocking him, trying his best to get Izuku to say something, but nothing was working until he began to make fun of Ojiro, saying that after everything, that foolish monkey thought he could beat me. What a weakling. How did he ever get into Class 1A? Izuku would snap. Cursed energy would begin covering him, flowing from his heart. He'd feel the blue aura now turning darker, thicker, covering his fists. What was that? The brainwashing would take place, and Shinso would tell Izuku to walk out of the arena and lose for him. Izuku for a moment would stand still, turning around and beginning to walk out of the arena. Ojiro would frown. Why? I told him not to say anything to Shinso. Did he not listen to what I had to say? Is it because he was angry about what he said about me? Damn, Midoriya. As Izuku reached the exit, about to stand out of bounds, he'd see golden, blue, green, all of these lights appearing from the shadows. These faces. His cursed energy would swell as he'd see a ninth. The man with his scar would turn from the shadows, saying, "My brother, is this really where someone as great as you falls?" It's you," all Izuku could think. As time seemed to slow down, Todo would introduce himself properly this time. "My name, brother, is Aoi Todo." And together, Todo would clap his hands from the shadows. The other lights would disappear and vanish as Izuku's hands would have come together on their own. One for all would activate, shattering some of his fingers as winds would explode from the clap. Just as his foot was about to step down, he'd swap places as the clap could be heard across the arena. Shinso would fall out of the arena as Izuku would have swapped places with him. Midnight would sound the flag saying that Shinso is out of bounds and has lost the match. He'd be shocked. He'd scream out to Izuku saying, How did you resist my mind control? It's not possible. Must be nice having such a superior quirk that allowed you to reach your goal." But Izuku was distracted. He didn't even respond. He turned the man's name over in his mouth. Todo, Aoi Todo. That's the man who saved me. And also, probably the one who transferred this quirk to me. I have to find out what happened to him. Izuku would finally speak, pausing. "It's not about your quirk. It's about how you use it." With that, he'd walk off to the stands, with everyone cheering at this final display, thinking that Izuku had somehow tricked Shinso into believing he was under his sway, and then used his own quirk at the end to throw him off balance. But that isn't what happened at all. No. Izuku couldn't even fathom what he had seen. He had seen all these strange faces, and then, behind them in the shadows, was him, Aoi Todo. This man, the first original user of Boogie Woogie. Then were the others? He thought maybe this must be related to One for All. How was it possible he could see them? The final matches would continue, all the way up until the semifinals, where it was finally time for Todoroki versus Izuku. Todoroki would once again ask if he had any relation to All Might, but Izuku's lips were sealed. And so the fight would begin. And just like in the original, Izuku would notice that Todoroki was going for an instant knockout. Using ice, he'd freeze his own feet in place, and then sent a barrier of ice hurling toward him. "Even if you swap Midoriya, you'll be stuck here. I can last far longer due to my quirk's resistance to the cold. But you? I'll be able to counter you before you can swap. Don't even think of trying to jump out of the arena at a last second like what you did before. I won't allow it." He'd create a wall of ice around the arena, limiting it so that Izuku couldn't instantly throw him into a knockout. "Todoroki, there's no way I would have let you have such an easy end. I'm gonna enjoy this fight till the end, you know that?" Izuku would take his finger and pull it back, charging it with One for All and cursed energy. "I just need to control it. Not all of it, just a little." He'd flick his finger, causing it to break, but it wouldn't have shattered or exploded. His finger began to swell, but it wasn't as bad as it would have been before. His cursed energy protected his finger mostly from the attack, and the burst of wind would shatter the next ice barrage. Izuku would begin moving forward, taking steps as he holds his hands up, ready to use Boogie Woogie if he needed to. "Todoroki, you should know better than anyone. There's no way you can beat me without using your full power." "Shut up, Midoriya. You don't understand. I never wanted these powers. It's all his fault. That bastard of a father. He was never a real dad to me." Izuku would grit his teeth. "Hey, Todoroki, I have a question for you." He'd smirk. "What kind of girl is your type?" The stands who had been cheering for this intense bloodbath before would stop. Even Midnight would be aghast, wondering what the point of this question was. Todoroki would be thrown off guard. What? What does that have to do with anything I've been saying?" "I said, Todoroki, What kind of girl's your type? It's a real important question. You gotta tell me now. Todoroki would think about the kind person that his mom and his sister were. Well, I guess I'd have to say that I like girls with a nice personality who are kind. And at that moment, Izuku would burst out in rage. That's such a lame answer, Todoroki. Izuku would charge up power as he throws his fist back. Screw this. He's going all out. Todoroki would be shocked. What does that have to... Izuku would grab the pendant at his neck. He'd grab it and bring it to his lips, kissing it. As power would flow over him, he'd tell Todoroki that one day he had been saved by someone, and that very question had changed his entire life. You have no passion, and if you keep thinking like a loser, then you're not going to be able to beat me either. What is it that you really want, Todoroki? Why are you even a hero in the first place? Proclaim your own life, Todoroki. And with that, Izuku's passion would ignite. Izuku would break off the tip of one of the glaciers, tossing it into the air in front of him. As he clasped his hands together, he would swap the ice with Todoroki, pulling him instantly into range. Todoroki's flames would be ignited on his arm now, not wondering what the heck he was talking about, but knowing that he wanted to win no matter what. He wanted to prove that he, himself, Shoto, was more than just his father's quirk. And with that, the instant that Todoroki was teleported, Izuku would throw a punch charged with cursed energy. As the flash of cursed energy would ram into Todoroki's body, he'd use just a bit, just a tad of One for All. He did not want to kill him, but he wanted him to feel it, to feel that why he lost. He'd barely tap into it, causing power to surge just in his fist. As he'd feel his knuckles crack into Todoroki's abdomen, Todoroki would get sent sprawling out into a glacier, getting rammed into it before he could react. He had been completely unprepared for Izuku to use this kind of method. He had never seen him use this to bring an opponent closer before. He hadn't even thought about it. Todoroki's flames would flare out as the glacier melted behind him. Izuku would stand tall, raising his fist, as the arena, confused, would still cheer, wondering why this kid was so eccentric. Meanwhile, Midnight and Mount Lady would both be staring, both in horror and awe. All Might would have his hand on his face, wondering where that speech came from. But even Endeavor was shocked, wondering how his son, the perfect being he had genetically manipulated, had been defeated so handily. Todoroki would laugh, seeing Izuku and telling him that he's the best. But he's not going to stay on the ground for long. I get what you're saying. I have to be more than just my quirk. I have to be my own person and just not go with the flow, right? Oh, yeah, I guess you could take it like that. That's just something that someone asked me once and, well, it made my life a lot better after. By the way, what did you actually answer with that? Oh, you don't need to know. I'll tell you another time. And finally, the finals would come. Bakugo would have taken the victory, now even more hyped to fight and get into the finals. It was now Izuku versus Kacchan in the final fight of the arena. Bakugo was excited for this fight. He was not going to be defeated no matter what. As soon as the fight started, he would go airborne, bring himself as high as possible. Izuku would try and make this fast, not wanting to prolong this fight. He'd try and jump out of the arena using Boogie Woogie, but even though Bakugo wasn't out of his range, he was still airborne. Izuku would fall to the arena, barely managing to cushion his fall, while Izuku would look in horror to see Bakugo hadn't been ringed out. He was high enough that because Izuku wasn't out of bounds himself, it gave Bakugo enough time, since he was already airborne, to ricochet back into the arena. He would take advantage of this, telling Deku it's not going to be as easy as last time. I'll kill you! And he'd fly into a howitzer impact. Izuku would grit his teeth, punching his fist into the arena and chucking a rock towards Bakugo. Bakugo would turn on the dime, anticipating that he'd be swapped with the rock, and Izuku was planning to swap himself with him to take his momentum and then use that blow to attack Bakugo. But that isn't what happened. Bakugo, now with his back turned, would feel an arm wrap around his neck and put him in a full Nelson. Izuku had swapped with the rock, now tightening around Bakugo in a grab. You bastard. Bakugo would stick his arms out, preparing to plummet both of them into the arena to force Izuku to take damage from the fall. You can't swap us with your hand around my neck. Just take it and die! But Izuku, with his other hand extended, would clap Bakugo's with explosions and all. Feeling the burns on his hand, Bakugo would be shocked. No, how is this? Bakugo would be now behind Izuku as the two would go plummeting directly into the ground, the weight of both Deku and his own explosions catapulting Deku into Bakugo's body into the earth, getting pummeled into the arena. You bastard! You can use my hands? He'd be severely weakened. His body would be covered in scratches and pieces of stone would be ripped through his back like shrapnel. Izuku would quickly try to get up as Bakugo continued to try and tighten his arm around him, saying, "Fine, then I'll just take us both out, Deku." And with that, Kacchan would grab his arm around Izuku, and he'd begin to light his hands ablaze, preparing to kamikaze both of them into a fiery explosion, confident that even after his burn injuries, that he would be the one to come out victorious. The explosion would completely engulf both of them. Izuku would feel a burning pain. He could feel himself, his body trying to protect him. As that blue energy would coat his body, he could only think that he needs to protect himself, that he needs to survive. The announcers would scream as they'd have heroes from the stands trying to pour water onto the explosion, but all that would be left would be a burning crater, and in the center, Izuku would stand. His hair would be burnt, but he'd be completely fine. How is that possible? Everyone, even All Might, was amazed. Meanwhile, Bakugo would be burnt completely, barely hanging to life as his hair, his skin, his entire uniform, everything had been burned away. Izuku's clothes had also been burned, but, well, what remained was completely intact. Ochako would fall backwards unconscious as everyone else in the arena would stare. Izuku would quickly cover himself. He couldn't believe it. At the exact instant that Kacchan had caused that self-destructive move, trying to take both of them out, and for such a childish reason, Izuku's body had protected him. And this time it wasn't just one for all, like what he had felt when Shinso had brainwashed him. No. The energy, this blue energy that was rippling inside of him, would begin to turn in on itself. It was like negative energy, and he realized the secret behind it as he was about to be blown to pieces. His energy had rippled together, forming in opposite directions and contracting, negative energy and negative energy making positive energy. Izuku, in a last-ditch effort to protect himself, had put all of his power, one for all of his cursed energy into overdrive, and he had awakened the reverse curse technique, a form of self-repair that allowed him to completely heal from the wounds Kacchan's explosion inflicted on him. He would look down at his hands. After having Boogie Woogie for over a year, training it that entire time, and coming close to death, he had awakened beyond his original power. He had even unknowingly surpassed Aoi Todo, Izuku himself having gained the handle on cursed energy, to the point of learning reverse curse technique. And the winner is Izuku Midoriya! The crowd would go wild. What could this guy not do? He was indestructible. That explosion had shattered the arena and endangered both of them. And yet, he looked even better than before the fight started. Izuku would hold his hands up looking at them. Not a single scar or blemish touched his hands. Meanwhile, Bakugo could barely even move. Izuku would look down in pity at him as he'd be carted off to the hospital with Recovery Girl in tow. He had severe burns, and it was possible he'd even lose some of the ability of his quirk by destroying his own sweat glands. Izuku felt an immense amount of guilt, but not only that, he could think of no reason for why he had to win so badly. Why Kacchan had hated him so much he was going to take himself down with him, in a burning explosion. It just wasn't right. It just was so sad. And with that, the grand finale of the entire tournament would occur, with Izuku Midoriya being declared the winner of the UA Sports Festival. If you guys liked this, and I think you might have, we had some really unique stuff happening, specifically between Bakugo and Deku's relationship, and of course how Izuku's powers have developed. Make sure to slap that like button, because if we get 400 likes, I'll do another big part like this, wrapping up the entire story of My Hero Academia, continuing on with what happens since Shigaraki and the League of Villains have been captured, Izuku won the sports festival. How is this going to affect everything moving forward? I'm particularly interested in highlighting his ability to use reverse curse technique now in conjunction with One for All, but we'll see that next time as we continue further into the story, if you guys can manage to hit that goal. Anyway, thank you all for enjoying the story. I hope you did, and I'll see you all in the next one. Adios.